Good morning and welcome to Great Tree Zen Women's Temple. This is our Saturday morning lectures, and this morning's speaker is the Reverend Teijo Munnich. I'm waiting for her to come online. There she is. Where did she go? There you are.
You can't see me? Can you hear me?
We can.
You can hear me, but you can't see me?
We can see you.
Oh, okay.
There you are. Would you please do the opening sutra?
And unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dhamma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teaching.
Now, a short stint on Dana. In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of dana paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or give freely. And this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. Other ways to practice dana is to offer support to those who share the teachings, to support places of spiritual practice, and give without judgment or expectation when opportunities arise. Those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis. Please support their practice by giving what you can. And not everybody who sees this may know that the Great Tree Zen Women's Temple was specifically founded to provide women with a place to go for long-term practice from about a month or 3 or whatever. It is also open to everyone to participate in sessions, men, women. They have family meditation, children's practice, working with children as well. So the only thing that is not open to everyone is the long-term residency. And if you'd like to support Great Tree and its mission, please go to greattreetemple.org and follow the donate path. This morning, our speaker is Reverend Teijo Munnich, who is the founder and abbess of Great Tree, and say good morning.
Hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I think that the name of this talk is Leaving Home and Practicing the Way. Is that right? What's the name of it? I see your mouth moving, Lisa. Could you please put your unmute?
No, I was going to say that's the title that I read.
Okay, good. Yeah, I wasn't sure exactly how I had titled it, but the reason that I wanted to talk about it, and last week, if you tuned in to listen to Randall Daegu Pride, he talked about staying at home and practicing the way. And there's usually two ways of thinking about this commitment that one can make to this practice, both a personal commitment and a bigger commitment to the Bodhisattva path. bigger in terms of giving one's whole life to it, I suppose. But the reason that I wanted to talk about it at this time was, as some of you know, that Trey Genjo, who is here, he must have waved, he's right here. He's planning to ordain now in the fall, but originally we talked about is, oh, as soon as you graduate, and we'll do it, which didn't make sense after we thought about it for a while. And so we moved it to the fall, but meanwhile, I had already set up these talks. And so I thought, oh, well, you know, we can talk about it sooner. So that was what kind of prompted this subject, but I know that there are two terms, at least in Soto Zen, that pertain to this making a commitment to the Bodhisattva path. And one of them is Zaike Tokudo. Tokudo is to ordain, really. And the other is Shuke Tokudo. And Zaike Tokudo, I think I got this straight, is staying at home and practicing the way, and Shuke Tokudo is leaving a home and practicing the way. So those are kind of the two designations, at least in the Soto Zen tradition. And what Randall was talking about, I listened to his talk, and he broke it down into three, which is, one was Jukai, which is receiving the precepts. The second is the Zaike Tokudo, and the third is the Shuke Tokudo. And he said, and actually that's the way I broke it down. That's not actually something. Zaike Tokudo is another way of calling Jukai, or receiving the precepts. But when I first decided to have the precept ceremony was when I was down in Charlotte, and I was sitting with the Charlotte group on a regular basis, and one day I thought, what could I do to help encourage their practice? And I thought about sewing of the Raksu, which was a practice in itself. And the Raksu, for those of you who may not know, is the small Buddha robe. And the receiving of the precepts. And I thought, oh, maybe I should offer that for some of these people who've been coming a lot, and you know, this might encourage them in their practice, because for me, it really was a very profound commitment that I didn't even realize I was making until I was in the middle of Jukai, honestly. But there was a shift in my practice, and I didn't even notice it until Katsukiri Roshi pointed it out to me. So I thought, well, this would be good. This would be good. So then I offered it, and several people from the Charlotte group came forward and made their Raksus, and we had a Jukai ceremony. So that was the first time with the small Raksu. But within recent years, within maybe the last 8 years or so, I realized that there are some people, both in the Charlotte group, in the Zen Center Asheville group, and the group here at Great Tree, who, you know, have made something more of a commitment and have really stayed with it and really have the practice in their heart. And so I thought, how can I encourage them to, you know, make that commitment a little deeper? And so that's where that lay practice robe came from, lay practice Okesa. And when we were making those lay practice Okesas, the first one was Nancy Spence, who is a local Zen teacher, and her students wanted to make her an Okesa. And so that's where the idea kind of evolved from. And so I said, well, Nancy had practiced and taught here at Great Tree, and we taught together, and I said, so this would be a good thing. This would be a great encouragement for her practice. And so I said to Tomoe-san, who was here helping with the sewing, so, because Tomoe-san had received such an okesa, she did not ordain as a priest, but her sewing teacher in Japan had given her one of these okesas, or had her sew one, and she had received it in the ceremony. So I thought, oh, well, there's a precedent for this in tradition. So I asked my son, so should it be a 5-row or a 7-row? Because a 7-row is what priests, one who ordains as a priestess. And she said, well, either is okay. But she said, in Japan, we do 5. But she said, Dogen Zenji didn't make a distinction between lay and priest practice. So I said, so you think it should be a 7-row? And she said, well, Dogen Zenji did not make a distinction between lay and priest practice, but you decide. So that really was, for me, I thought about that and I thought, that's really a good thing. And it reminded me of a story that my friend Tyrone told me. Ty was a former Jesuit priest for about 10 years, I think. And, but he was, he practiced with Katsugiri Roshi. And he told this story one time. He said, there was this hermit who lived out in the woods. And there was this man who wanted to know, the truth of life. So he went to see this hermit. And the first question he asked this hermit was, what is the best way to live? And this hermit says, well, he said, what is the highest way to live or something? He said, well, if you can be, a professional and married and have kids, have a family and, do all that stuff and not be attached to any of it, that is the best way to live. So then he said, well, what's the next best way to live? And so then he said, well, if you're just a regular guy who's doing his best and, but living in the world and trying to navigate your life and just doing your best, that's probably the best way, or the next best way. So then I kind of go down. He says, well, then why are you out here in the woods, out here in the forest, in a hut by yourself? He said, well, we all do the best we can. And that really resonated for me because that's sort of the way I felt about my ordination. When I finally decided, and it took me about 3 years after the question was brought up, when I finally decided, yes, okay, I'm going to do this, it's sort of like my life came into focus. Anybody who knows me knows I'm like Pigpen, I'm very scattered, I have all this kind of, I'm a lot of dust around me, although my name means right stillness, so there must be some stillness somewhere in there. As I say, the center of the cyclone is very still. But anyway, when I ordain someone as a priest, and of course, in the Buddhist tradition, that's the beginning of your training. It's not the culmination of something. But I think each one of these Zaike Tokudos, the Jukai, and also maybe receiving an Okesa, there's a recommitment there, and there's something deep that awakens when we make that kind of a commitment. I mean, it's a commitment to sew an Okesa, it's a commitment to sew a rock suit. It takes me 60 hours if I don't make a mistake. And I've made 5 rock suits and I've never made one without having to backtrack. So there's a commitment in making an okesa. And then there's a commitment in saying, I want to step further into this practice and wear this okesa. When I first received my rock suit, I didn't want to wear it. It sort of felt like I was standing out, like saying, hey, I'm one of the big shots around here. And a couple of us must have felt that way, because after our Jukai ceremony, we went to the Zen Center and did not take our roxers. And at the end of that Zazen period, Katagiri Roshi said, anyway, where are your roxers? So we started wearing our roxers. And it's, it's kind of, yeah, I mean, part of it is you don't want to stand out, but in a way, you do stand out, and you are saying something, and people have a little more expectation that you're a little more perfect because you've done something a little more. But actually, it's the other way. Most of us that do this do it because we have to. I think, of course, that's just my perspective. So I have these other things I wanted to talk about, and this was kind of where I ended up when I was putting some thoughts together about this. As some of you know, even up till last night, I was still suffering from exhaustion from all the traveling I've been doing lately. I've had like one trip a week, and the culmination was last weekend in Los Angeles. Lots of ceremonies and rehearsals for ceremonies and meetings, and it was all great, but I was really exhausted all week. So this is kind of a loosely slung together talk. But I do have some points, and maybe I'll go back to the beginning. So for me, like I said, when I finally made the decision to ordain, I said, okay, I'll do it. I said to Katagiri Roshi. I had thought that there would be much more trepidation at that point, but actually at that point, it was like lots of things came into focus. And I thought, and I started to realize that I had prioritized something in my life, something awakened in me. And I think that this decision itself, of course, threw me in after my ordination. It threw me into a state of, how can I describe it? I felt suspended in space, kind of, because, you kind of think you have this idea that when you ordain, it's like when you come to meditation and you think as soon as you become a meditator, you become peaceful. And actually what happens in meditation is that all this stuff comes up. And of course, it does make you more peaceful, because when you deal with this stuff, you realize that it's all imagination. And that's what Zazen helps us to do, sitting down like that. But I'm sorry, I lost my track. But anyway, for me, this priest life is something that is really taking a dive into the unknown, into the unknown, which is really bodhicitta. It's really where bodhicitta takes us. I've been talking about bodhicitta lately as simply letting go. It's what brings us to this practice, because probably most of us, if not all of us, have come to this practice as a result of some kind of you might call it a spiritual crisis, although it might have happened as, in my case, I was dumped by someone that I was very attached to. And, so that was kind of a crisis. And I turned to spirituality, seeking some kind of stability or something. But I had to let go in order to realize what I needed to do in order to pull myself out of that place. And so you have to let go of that attachment in order to even have that
recognition that, oh, I can do something, and I should do something. Even if I don't know what it is, I should do something. And that bodhicitta is really, I mean, that place, waking up is to take those preconceived ideas about how things should be and letting them all go and expanding our awareness to accept something else, something different than how we thought it should be. And we've all experienced that probably more than once in our lives. And so that kind of letting go is what, to me, what bodhicitta is. So bodhi means awakened and citta means mind. And it's the mind of awareness. It's not the mind of just logic. Of course, that's all part of it. So, you can see I haven't totally recovered from this because I've also just lost my track again. So jumping into the unknown is what we do all along the way. So there are different jumping points, I guess you could say. And I should say, you've heard us talking about those of us that went to the Jukai last fall, the precepts ceremony, the big one in Los Angeles, how that ceremony, kind of brought it all together. But probably there weren't too many people at that ceremony that didn't have some form of a meltdown, because there's a level of intensity that happens when you get a couple hundred people together and try to orchestrate something and kind of move everyone around and understand the meaning at the same time and doing it. I mean, it's a very intense thing. And so bodhicitta comes up a long way at those times where you say, oh, it's not working, oh, and then you kind of say, okay, time to do the next thing. So that kind of opportunity presents itself, and I'm beginning to realize more and more that ritual is that opportunity to come together and give ourselves over to something. So there's lots of elements, and I think that the priest's training, which is what Trey is going to be doing, Genjo is going to be doing, the priest's training is to help you become comfortable in Zazen. In my case, it's definitely in Zazen. Hoshinji was had a strong Zazen community when I was there. Always someone to sit with. But also, in how ritual brings us together. All these rituals, if we, if we do them and do them together and let ourselves go in them, there's some meaning that that awakens something in us. There's something about doing it and getting a sense of it. So the very interesting thing about, as I was thinking about these three ways that I think about, that I have thought about these different kind of stages of practice, so to speak, that I kind of created that middle one too, is sorry, I lost my thread again. How did I start that sentence?
Talking about the different stages of practice.
Oh, I know. I see, and there's a thread, there's a connection between the Jukai, which is Hakuya Roshi called it lay ordination, and we received it, although none of us knew what that meant. And then the Shuke Tokudo, the priest ordination, they both are basically the same precept ceremony. And so is the Zaike Tokudo. The difference between the Jukai Zaike Tokudo and the one where I gave the robe, and maybe this is just creating more confusion or something, but is the only difference is that they received a robe. They received this robe, this bigger robe, this 7 robe, really, which is really a teaching robe. Because we all have the capacity to teach, and when we've been practicing for a while, it really is our what I think are part of our bodhisattva practice to share the teachings, one of the precepts. So there's the same ceremony, only you receive the okesa and the zagu. The zagu is the bowing, so you don't get your okesa stay on the floor. And then, the priest ordination is you also receive your bowls. So you receive it's the same ceremony, but you receive bowls in your robe. And in all of them, you receive some lineage papers, your Dharma name and your way name. So I'm explaining this a little further from my perspective because Lorna mentioned when Daigu asked, fleshed this out, that it was helpful for her to understand how this is understood. And so I'm just kind of saying how that is. So part of what I do, and I told this to all of the people that are ordained, is that I want them to go and receive that traditional Japanese training. And of course, there aren't a lot of places where, in Japan, where the traditional Japanese Zen training includes a lot of Zazen. Most of the time, it includes more learning how to do ceremonies, which is also very good. And a lot of them are memorial ceremonies, which is also very good to have that. But the Zazen is because of that kind of training, it doesn't seem to be emphasized. But there is a place where I suggested that they go in Japan that also has foreigners, and where there is, as I understand it, quite a strong Zazen practice as well as study. So that's where this talk was coming from, was this ordination, and I thought it would be helpful if people understood how I think about ordination. I think about as this is the time to immerse ourselves, really immerse ourselves in practice, and that's the idea of leaving home and practicing the way. Staying at home and practicing the way is really, it's called the householder's practice. You're still staying at home and maintaining a household. But it's a much harder practice, I think, because there are many more distractions. Even as an ordained person, and this is true of a lot of ordained people in the United States now, but even as an ordained person, when I was first ordained, I had to live the life of a householder, or I thought I did. There was really no place where we didn't have a residence in Minnesota. So I had to have a job and to live in the neighborhood. And it's a very, very hard practice. I always felt torn between immersing myself in practice at Zen Center and immersing myself in my job, which I loved. And so I was always very torn because there wasn't enough time in the day to do all of it. So I was very happy to be able to go off and just immerse myself in that way. And, at San Francisco Zen Center, they have not made distinctions between lay practice and priest practice. The lay practitioners do exactly the same thing. And of course, that was necessary because there weren't a lot of monks around at San Francisco Zen Center in the early days. So the lay practitioners were just put into the same roles as priests are in Japan. And the same thing happened at Minnesota Zen Center. So I knew how to do a lot of priest roles when I got to Japan. But they're sort of so equal in the monastery. The lay people were always complaining because they didn't get to do some of the same stuff. You know, they weren't trained how to ring the bells, and they didn't have jobs. We all had jobs, but they just had a lot of free time when we were doing our jobs. Let's see. So I had some thoughts. What time is it? 10:30. I had some thoughts in relation to this about traditional practice as I experienced it in Japan, and how Zen is practiced in America. And as you know, I practiced at Tassajara first, and also at Hokyoji in Minnesota. And before I went to Japan, so I had, I came at it from a very American perspective because we just had to adapt a lot of things. And of course, the Japanese culture is very refined, but it could also do things in more traditional ways because they were already there. As you know, I'm trying to adapt the diet that's healthier, and some people don't like it, but it's kind of a macrobiotic diet, and it seems like, from the perspective of practice, having a healthy diet, having a diet that is more balanced, it balances our body a little more. And of course, that's a work in progress, but it seems logical. It seems like body and mind can't be separated. And as you know, that's one of the things that I feel needs to be a little bit more in our consciousness in this practice, is our body awareness. So I'm trying to introduce it in various ways. It's not so easy to put it into a Zen schedule. So anyway, yeah, I think we have to ask the question of the value of tradition and the value of just sitting down and shutting up and experiencing Fantaza, what comes up. I think that in itself has a lot of value. But I think that there's some tradition that points in Japan that points to, and it comes from China, it's Asian thing, that comes from Asia, I should say, that brings with it a certain spirit that is not very apparent in American culture. And people ask me, well, what is that? And it's hard for me to put my finger on it. I think one of the simple things that I might point to is what it means, what Sangha means, what it means to work together. The three things that are emphasized by Dogen, were emphasized by Dogen in monastic life, were Zazen, study, and working together. And I try to put all of those elements into Sesshin. That's what Kadagiri Roshi did, so that we could experience Sangha in these three different ways. But it's very hard to really understand that deeply if you're not doing a lot of practice together, if you don't immerse yourself in community. And I'm not sure exactly how to create that. Part of my vision for here at Great Tree was something that I experienced when I was at Hoshinji, was that there was a community that was living there, and because of that, there was a lot of stability, so people could come and go, and they were very supported by that community. So I'm hoping that when we talk about a residential community, I'm hoping that at some point this will develop into a more residential community. And we've had that at times, interestingly enough. More than once, there have been 2 people that have come for extended periods of time. And sometimes it's just been 1 person, but usually there's a couple that will come at a time. So we'll have a little 3 or 4 person sangha. And for a month or 2 months or 3 months. And the power of that kind of practice is very profound, it's very deep. So this is why I like to, and you know, some of the spirit can be elicited by that kind of practice. Because since I have experienced some of that, I can share that and share the spirit of that. Kind of work together as a sangha. And I wasn't there for so long, you know, I was only there for more than 2 years. But you know, we experience it during session. You know, by the end of the session, we're all moving together, we're all working together, and that comes to us and study and work. And study in this case includes both maybe a Dharma talk, but also Doksan. So I'm going to stop there. I know I've been all around the block here. Maybe some questions would elicit kind of things you might want to know about, or maybe you have some comments.
Can can you say more about what it might be that the traditions from Asia like represent and all? Because you know, there's a lot of ways that they don't speak to us now, you know, as they would just innately to someone who grew up in Japan. And so, you know, I wonder, I mean, it seems, although I'm not clear what those ways are, that traditional practice has somehow, in some ways, adapted to American ways of operating in the world. But can you talk about what those uniquely Asian things are and how you see that interface?
Well, of course, that's one of the things I went to Japan to figure out. And when Chinyo went, I told her to consider that, you know, because my understanding of tradition, this is something I've been thinking about for a long time. Because growing up in the Catholic Church, at a certain point, we began to question what is tradition and what is the overlay of a culture at a certain era in history. And it really doesn't have any deeper meaning, you know, like the story about the person who cut off the end of the ham so that it would fit in the pot pan, you know that story I'm referring to. It was something their grandmother did, but they didn't know why, and the grandmother said, it's because it didn't fit into my pan, or something. Well, anyway, I won't go into that. But anyway, there were some, you know, I mean, I discovered in the Catholic Church some rather archaic traditions that really didn't have any particular meaning, that somehow just became a lot of extra baggage. And that's, so I had a big question about how much kind of Hiroshi was bringing up Japanese culture and how much was tradition, because, you know, in Minnesota, every time he'd introduce something new, somebody would complain, oh, that's just Japanese culture. Well, some of it I recognized from being in a convent. It was monastic, you know, and Zen is a very monastic tradition. So, but there were certain things that I was like, I don't know. This seems like maybe it's just Japanese culture and maybe it's not that adaptable to American culture. And so I wanted to go to Japan to figure that out. And to be honest with you, I haven't even come close to figuring that out. I don't know what it is, but I do know that when I'm practicing with people in sesshin, which is the way I practice with people mostly, or those people who have stayed as residents, there've been 25 or more people who have stayed for a month or more here, that those things come up. And I start to say, oh yeah, like one very simple thing is when we used to work, and at Hoshinji, working together was very encouraged, that everyone worked together. We all did kind of the same thing. And of course, the Tenzo often couldn't because they had to work in the kitchen. And so they didn't so much, but everybody else, there wasn't like some people who had a higher status, so they did more important things in the office and stuff like that. It was all, we all went to chop wood together, we all pick weeds together, you know, but when I first started working with everyone, and you know, I would go out there with my two roommates and I would say, so what should I be doing? And they would never be able to tell me what I should be doing. But what I noticed is that they would just watch until they saw something that needed to be done. And then they would go over and do it. And that had a very profound effect on me to look in that way, to not make the other person responsible for my contribution, but to just notice what needed to be done. Now, I don't know whether that's Japanese, whether that's Zen, whether, you know, I don't know where that comes from. I know that Japan has had a powerful influence of Buddhism over, you know, several hundred years, and it hasn't been in America that long. So I don't know what is Buddhist influence and what is not. Harada Roshi, the teacher there, I heard him say more than once, I think that it was easier, that Japanese people understood more easily what he was talking about. He had to do a lot more explaining to Westerners. And yeah, that's probably true. You know, there were some things that I just didn't get, you know, and that Hiroshi talked about, that Hiroshi talked about, that, you know, it took a lot more explanation for me to kind of understand it. And that's kind of the culture that we live in. And yet, you know, there's something valuable about learning how to watch and pay attention. I mean, it's a mindfulness practice, really. And when we were out in Los Angeles, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 years ago, the Sokan, Kibo Roshi, who is the head of North American practice, he has a strong practice, a training from AAG. He was there for 9 years, and he really knows all the ceremonies, and he has that kind of, understanding. And he was teaching us some of the ceremonies, and some people were trying to learn kind of the nuances. It was basic ceremony, but there were little nuances that he was talking about. And somebody said, oh, we should write all this down, we should make some books. And he said, yes, and they said, will you help us do that? He said, yes, I'll help you, that you can do that. But the way to learn is by watching and by doing it, And it's a different way of learning from reading it in the book, putting it through our heads, and then trying to transfer it into our bodies. And so when we were at Hokyoji, and maybe a lot of this has to do with the way of learning, way of thinking about things. When we were at Hokyoji, Narasaki Tsuken Roshi came to teach us how to do the Ryaku Fusatsu, which is the traditional full-length, I used to call it precepts, but really it's the full moon ceremony. It's the repentance ceremony, what I call setting aside and beginning anew, which we're going to be doing tonight. We do it on the full moon, and it comes from Buddha's time with his sangha, and it's a time of kind of admitting where you need to try and improve, try to admitting your contribution to conflicts and things like that. And so he came to teach us the traditional Japanese form of it, which is pretty lengthy and includes a precepts renewal, but it's essentially a repentance ceremony, and is essentially the Jukai ceremony. So it's kind of a renewal of the Jukai ceremony, the full one. And so he was teaching us the chanting. And as he was teaching us, people were chanting with me. And he kept saying, no, listen, and then do it. And so there was this kind of a disconnect. I don't exactly know why we all wanted to jump in, but it's and this is what we were just doing out in LA too. First you listen, and this is what he said, first listen, and then try it. And this musical notation for it is just, I have no idea. I've learned different kinds of musical notation, and I could not figure this stuff out, but it didn't matter because we listened and did it. It's a different kind of learning than engaging our intellect in a certain way. And maybe that's not Japanese, maybe it's Buddhist, maybe it's not Buddhist, maybe it's just the particular people I've been around. I don't know, but so that kind of thing, when I went back to Minnesota, I went directly to Hokyoji in southern Minnesota, because I wasn't ready to reintegrate into American culture after a couple of years so intensely. And people were building down at Hokyoji. There were just a few, maybe 4 or 5 guys that were mostly building. And so I wanted to see how I could help. So I said, well, I can't build, but I can cook for you. So I was doing cooking. I was doing a lot of cooking, and people would come to Hokyoji, and they would want to help in some way. And so they'd send them to the kitchen to help me. And they'd walk in, and there'd be stacks of dishes. and food to put away after a meal. And they would come in and they would say to me, is there anything I can do? And it kind of annoyed me, but in another way, I know that, you know, that was me. And that kind of awareness that that to just look around is something that, you know, maybe we have to, it would be nice to cultivate that in this culture, you know? Sometimes a person, Kami Hiroshi and his wife would do this, you know, but I recognize this in Japan too. Someone would just touch your arm by way of encouragement to help you. That's it. Just touching your arm, that there's that kind of consciousness, and it might be a Japanese thing, I don't know, but I think it comes from some kind of tradition that we don't haven't kind of adapted into our culture very much. And maybe it's a monastic thing, you know. I mean, I know that there's a lot more awareness of that kind of thing even at the convent. I've been back to visit the convent a couple times in the last 6 or 7 years, and there might be some of that there. But at any rate, it didn't rub off on me in that situation. But so I don't know if that answers your question. But I do think that the way to really find out about that is to, you know, find ways to practice with other people. And to me, this is the value of a residential place where people can actually be in residence and practicing together, because this kind of awareness it can be cultivated more easily in this kind of thing, in this kind of situation, I think.
It kind of, while you were answering, it came to mind that that's what Tomoe-san was doing in not answering your question. You know, she wasn't taking responsibility for 5 rows or 7 rows because it wasn't her place to do that, you know. And I feel like often when somebody asks you a question, you kind of do the same thing of broadening out what's, you know, being asked beyond the question, like what I asked you, you know, to kind of give a different kind of answer. So thank you.
Thank you. Any thoughts? Okay, let's finish up. May the merit of this practice
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings
benefit all beings
and bring peace.
and bring peace.